everyone! So today we are going to be talking about some underrated books. I have 5 books that I want to talk about today. So I've been a pretty avid reader for probably the last 3.5 years, and I've read some pretty hyped books. I talked a lot about those hyped books in past videos, but I've also I dipped my toes into a couple of underrated books and series, and I really feel like I want to talk about them today because there are just so many underrated books out there that are really just so good and don't gain the attention that I feel like they're worthy of. So the first series that I have on this list is the Gone series by Michael Grant. This book is kind of similar to Lord of the Flies. It is about a group of kids, all of them are under 15, and they all of a sudden get trapped into this 20-mile sphere. And they have to learn how to live on their own and essentially just survive without adults. It's a really interesting series. It does get a little bit violent, a little bit towards the later books, but all in all, I did really enjoy it, and I really do highly recommend. This book dealt with a lot of themes that I feel like a lot of authors are a little bit nervous to dive into, but I think this author handled them all really well, and again, I highly recommend the series for anyone that likes Lord of the Flies or even The Hunger Games, because the series is definitely pretty similar to The Hunger Games in a way. The next book I want to talk about is This Is Our Story by Ashley Eelston. This is kind of a murder mystery novel. It follows 5 friends, and one of them is murdered, and then the other 4 are blamed. This is pretty similar to One of Us is Lying. I've never actually read that book, but the synopsis of One of Us is Lying is fairly similar to the plot of this book. However, it's definitely a lot more of a cop mystery because the main character works at a police station, so she's kind of like a detective in all of this. And I personally thought it was a really interesting story. It's definitely an underrated murder mystery because it honestly, the end was actually really well structured in my opinion, and I feel like a lot of murder mysteries aren't well structured, but I thought this murder mystery was really well structured, and I really do highly recommend it for anyone that likes a detective kind of cop mystery. It was definitely a pretty good story. The next book I want to talk about is the Fandom series by Anna Day. This book follows a group of friends who absolutely love this fairy tale, and they go to a Comic-Con, and all of a sudden they get sucked into the fairy tale and they have to be characters in it. I would say this book is pretty similar to the Whatever After series. If any of you have ever heard of that series, it's actually one of the reasons why I got into it. The Whatever After series is by Sarah Milowski, and it's a middle grade series about 2 siblings that go into a bunch of fairy tales. And the reason I picked up the Fandom series was because I thought it sounded pretty similar to that series. So it definitely is a pretty good series if you like that type of stuff. 2 books. I read the first one in the very beginning of quarantine, and then I read the second one a little bit later. And I honestly liked the second one better because they had different points of views, and I thought the alternating points of views made the story much more appealing and interesting, but they're both pretty good series. And again, I highly recommend if you liked fairy tales or if you ever liked the Whatever After series when you were younger, because they really are pretty good books that are similar. So the next book I want to talk about is A Short History of the Girl Next Door by Jared Reck. I've seen this book floating around a couple of these lists before, and I really do agree with it. It is a pretty underrated book. This book follows a high school freshman named Matt, and he has a childhood best friend who's also his neighbor, and all of a sudden he develops feelings for this neighbor, but he can't tell her that because that would kind of ruin their friendship. So when his friend starts dating this other guy, he gets really jealous and thinks that this is the worst thing that can happen to him, but then a tragedy hits that's even worse and really makes him question what he knows about life. And this is a really great coming-of-age story. I don't really read many books that are set in the high school setting. I find them kind of overly dramatic and a little bit petty. And honestly, the premise of this book made it seem like it was going to be one of those, but it's really stuck with me 2 years after reading it, and it honestly is a really good coming-of-age story for anyone that, wants to read about internal stuff and really finding yourself. Also, a lot of really good supporting characters in the book that I thought were all really great. Specifically the English teacher. I really liked him for some reason. And yeah, it's just a really great story, and I highly recommend. And the last book I want to talk about, this one might come as a shock for some of you, but that is The Institute by Stephen King. By no means do I think that Stephen King is an underrated author. I just feel like The Institute is probably one of his most underrated books. You know, almost everyone has heard of Stephen King. I've actually only read this one by Stephen King. I've never read another Stephen King novel. I've wanted to read a couple of other ones, especially after reading this book. This book follows a 10-year-old boy named Luke, whose parents are one day suddenly murdered. And then Luke gets sent to this institute, which is essentially a prison with kids that have special powers. Luke meets a couple of other kids there, and they're all in the front half. And the front half is the place that you want to be at if you are in this building at all. You want to be in the front half. The back half is dreaded, and no one wants to end up there. So when kids start mysteriously disappearing there, Luke starts to get even more worried than he already is. But the problem is that no one ever leaves the institute. So this is a really great mystery novel. It's just so thrilling. It really has that rush to it. It honestly made me want to read more of Stephen King's books because it's one of his less violent ones. It's one of his less scary ones. It's not like The Shining or anything. Not that I've read The Shining, but I know it's not like The Shining. But it definitely was really good. And again, kind of underrated when it comes to Stephen King. But by no means do I think that Stephen King is underrated. He is very popular, and for good reason, because this book was really great, and I'm sure his other books are just as good. So those are 5 underrated books and series that I'm going to talk about today. If you like this video, please let me know, because I would love to do more of these. I really feel like there's so many books out there that not a lot of people have heard of or are familiar with, because they're just not as advertised as much as mainstream books as other books out there. So yes, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later. Bye everyone!